When they showed me the photos, my heart stopped. There I was, or someone who looked eerily like me from behind, wrapped in the arms of a stranger. The timestamp read yesterday afternoon, when I'd been grocery shopping alone. My husband's face had gone pale, his father standing beside him with a grim expression that didn't quite reach his eyes. That's when I knew. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. This was a calculated attack. I can explain, I said, though there was nothing to explain. The woman in the photos wasn't me. But Richard Barrett, my father-in-law, had already poisoned the well. He'd spent 2 years waiting for this moment, the moment he could finally prove I was never good enough for his son. I never thought my life would become a nightmare in the span of 12 hours. But that's exactly what happened the day my father-in-law decided to destroy me. My morning had started like any other. I woke up beside James, my husband of 2 years, in our modest 2-bedroom home on the outskirts of the city. Unlike his family's sprawling estate, our house was purchased with our combined savings and a mortgage we could barely afford. But it was ours and I loved it. Morning, beautiful, James murmured, his voice still heavy with sleep. He pulled me closer, his warmth a comfort against the early autumn chill. Morning. I smiled, kissing him before reluctantly pulling away. I've got to get ready. Big presentation today. James groaned. Call in sick. Stay with me. You know I can't. I laughed, throwing a pillow at him. Some of us don't have daddy's company to fall back on. It was a joke, but one that never sat well with either of us. James had chosen to pursue his own career as an architect rather than join Barrett Industries, a decision that had created a rift between him and his father. Richard Barrett never understood why his son would choose a modest salary over a guaranteed executive position. And he understood even less why James would choose to marry me, Olivia Matthews, a marketing executive from a middle-class family with no connections and no trust fund. I showered quickly, mentally rehearsing my presentation while the hot water washed over me. Today could mean a promotion if I impressed the right people. I needed this win. Not just for my career, but to prove to myself more than anyone that I deserved my place in James's life, despite what his family thought. Don't forget we're having dinner with my parents tonight, James called out as I was getting dressed. My stomach dropped. Tonight? I thought that was next week. Dad called last night while you were in the shower. Said he has some important announcement to make. I met James's eyes in the mirror as I applied my mascara. We both knew what the announcement likely was. Richard had been hinting for months that he wanted James to reconsider his position at Barrett Industries. Each family dinner felt like a carefully orchestrated campaign to lure James back into the fold. I'll be home by 6, I promised, though my enthusiasm had significantly diminished. Hey, James said, wrapping his arms around me from behind. We're a team, remember? Whatever Dad's planning, we'll handle it together. I nodded, wanting desperately to believe him. But I'd seen firsthand how James's resolve weakened around his father. Richard Barrett was a force of nature, a self-made millionaire who'd built his company from nothing. He commanded respect, even from his son. I love you, I said, turning to face him. No matter what. And I love you. Always. I left our house at 7:30 a.m., unaware that Richard Barrett had already set his plan in motion. My presentation went better than expected. The client loved our campaign ideas, and my boss gave me a rare nod of approval. By noon, I was riding high on success, feeling more confident about the evening ahead. I decided to use my lunch break to pick up groceries for the weekend, knowing we'd be too exhausted after dinner with the Barretts. The supermarket was quiet on a Friday afternoon. I took my time, filling my cart with ingredients for the pasta dish I'd been wanting to try. As I reached for a bottle of wine, I felt a strange sensation, like I was being watched. I turned, scanning the aisle, but saw no one paying me any particular attention. I shook off the feeling and continued shopping. But the uneasiness persisted, following me through the checkout and into the parking lot. As I loaded groceries into my trunk, a man bumped into me. I'm so sorry, he said, steadying me with a hand on my arm. He was handsome in a generic way, tall, well-dressed, with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. It's fine, I replied, pulling away slightly. Something about him fell off. "You're Olivia Barrett, right? James's wife." He continued, not releasing my arm. "Yes," I answered cautiously. "Do I know you?" "No, but I know all about you." His smile widened. "Richard sends his regards." Before I could process what he meant, he walked away, disappearing around the corner of the building. I stood frozen, groceries forgotten, as a chill ran down my spine. Had Richard sent someone to follow me? The idea seemed paranoid, but the man had known my name, my relationship to the Barretts. I should have called James right then. I should have told him what happened. But I didn't want to sound crazy, accusing his father of having me followed based on a strange encounter. Besides, I had to get back to work. The incident, though unsettling, would have to wait. That was my first mistake. I returned to the office, threw myself into work, and managed to push the strange encounter to the back of my mind. By 5:30 p.m., I was packing up to leave when my phone buzzed with a text from James. "Come straight to my parents' house." Dad insisted we start early. I texted back, "What about the groceries in my car? Just come. Please. It's important." Something in his terse message sent warning signals flaring through my body. This wasn't like James. I gathered my things quickly and headed to my car, dread building with each step. The Barrett estate sat on 3 acres of manicured lawns in the city's most affluent neighborhood. The house itself was a modern architectural masterpiece, all glass, steel, and intimidating angles. I'd always felt like an intruder there, despite James's assurances that it was his home too. As I pulled up to the gate, I noticed James's car already in the driveway, along with his mother's sleek Mercedes and his father's Bentley. The security guard nodded as he let me through, his expression unreadable. Had he always looked at me that way, or was I becoming paranoid? I parked beside James's car and checked my appearance in the rearview mirror. I looked tired, stressed. Not at all ready for whatever power play Richard had planned for the evening. But I didn't have a choice. I grabbed my purse, took a deep breath, and walked to the front door. The housekeeper, Elena, opened it before I could ring the bell. "They're in Mr. Barrett's study," she said quietly, not meeting my eyes. Another bad sign. I made my way through the cavernous entryway, my heels clicking against the marble floor. The study was at the back of the house, Richard's private domain where business deals were made and family decisions decreed. I'd only been inside a handful of times, always feeling like an unwelcome visitor. The door was ajar. I could hear voices, Richard's commanding baritone, James's higher, agitated tone, and Caroline Barrett's soothing murmur. I knocked lightly and pushed the door open. The scene before me was like something from a bad movie. James stood by the window, his back rigid with tension. Caroline sat perched on the edge of a leather armchair, her perfectly manicured hands clasped tightly in her lap. And Richard sat behind his massive desk like a judge presiding over a trial, his expression severe. "Olivia," he said, my name sounding like an accusation on his lips. "Come in." "Close the door." James turned at the sound of my name, and the look on his face made my blood run cold. It wasn't anger I saw there. It was devastation. "What's going on?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. Richard opened a folder on his desk. "I think you know why we've called you here." "Actually, I don't," I replied, looking to James for explanation. He wouldn't meet my eyes. "James," Richard said, "show your wife what came to my attention this afternoon." With visible reluctance, James crossed the room and took an envelope from his father's desk. He paused before handing it to me, his voice barely above a whisper. "Please tell me there's an explanation." The envelope contained photographs, professional quality, crisp and clear. They showed a woman with my build, my hair color, in an outfit similar to what I'd worn that day. She was wrapped in the arms of a man, their faces close, bodies pressed together intimately. In some shots, they were entering a hotel. In others, they were kissing in a car that looked disturbingly like mine. But it wasn't me. The woman's face was never clearly visible, always angled away from the camera or obscured by the man's head. The man was the same one who'd approached me in the parking lot. "This isn't me," I said immediately, looking up from the photos. "James, you have to believe me. This is not me." The timestamps indicate these were taken today, Richard said, his voice dripping with false concern. Around 12:30 p.m. Where were you at that time, Olivia? I was grocery shopping during my lunch break. The groceries are still in my car. I turned to James. You can check. I have the receipt. Grocery shopping doesn't take 2 hours, Richard countered. The hotel check-in was at 1:15 p.m. I wasn't at any hotel. My voice rose with desperation. This is a setup. This woman isn't even me. Caroline spoke for the first time, her voice gentle but her words cutting. Darling, we all want to believe you. But the evidence is quite compelling. Evidence? I laughed bitterly. You can't even see her face clearly in any of these photos. This is absurd. James finally looked at me, his eyes searching mine. Liv, just tell me the truth. If there's something wrong, if I've done something, there's nothing wrong with us. I moved toward him, but he stepped back. That single movement felt like a knife to my heart. James, this is insane. I love you. I would never cheat on you. Then explain these, Richard demanded, gesturing to the photos. I can't explain them because I don't know who that woman is or how these photos were staged. But I know who might. I turned to face Richard directly. A man approached me in the parking lot today. He knew my name, mentioned you specifically, said you sent your regards. The same man who's in these photos. Richard's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Are you accusing me of something, Olivia? I'm saying these photos are fake and you know it. My hands were shaking now with anger more than fear. You've never wanted me in James's life. You've spent 2 years trying to prove I'm not good enough for him or your family. That's quite an accusation, Richard said coldly. Especially from someone caught in such a compromising position. Dad, is this true? James asked, his voice strained. Did you have Olivia followed? Of course not, Richard scoffed. I received these anonymously. I called you here because I thought you deserved to know the truth about your wife. The truth is that your father is lying, I said to James. He set this up. Caroline stood, smoothing her dress. I think we all need to calm down. These accusations aren't helping anyone. I agree, Richard said. James, perhaps you should take Olivia home. You two have much to discuss. James looked lost, torn between the woman he loved and the father he'd spent a lifetime trying to please. Let's go, he finally said to me, his voice flat. The drive home was excruciating. James gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white, while I sat beside him, numb with shock and betrayal. Neither of us spoke until we pulled into our driveway. The groceries, James said suddenly. What? You said you were grocery shopping. Where are the groceries? In my car. At your parents' house. I closed my eyes, realizing how bad this looked. James, I swear to you. Stop. He cut me off, turning off the engine. I need time to think. Inside our home, the tension was unbearable. James went straight to the kitchen and poured himself a whiskey, something he rarely did. I stood in the doorway, watching him drain the glass in one go. Can we talk about this rationally? I asked. Those photos are fake. That's not me. Then who is it? He demanded. Some woman who looks exactly like you, drives the same car, wears the same clothes. And why would my father go to such elaborate lengths to frame you? Because he's never thought I was good enough for you. I exploded. He wants you back at Barrett Industries, married to someone from your social circle. Someone he can control, unlike me. James shook his head. That's paranoid, Liv. Is it? Then explain the man in the parking lot. Explain how these photos appeared on the exact day your father suddenly called a family dinner. Maybe there is no man. Maybe that's just your cover story. His words hit me like a physical blow. You think I'm lying? I don't know what to think. James shouted, slamming his glass down. I've got my father showing me pictures of my wife with another man, and my wife telling me my father is framing her. What am I supposed to believe? You're supposed to believe me. I cried. I'm your wife. I love you. I've never given you any reason to doubt me. James ran his hands through his hair, his face a mask of confusion and pain. I need some air, he muttered, heading for the door. James, please don't leave. We need to figure this out together. But he was already gone, the door closing behind him with a finality that left me standing alone in our kitchen, wondering if my marriage had just been destroyed by a man who'd never wanted it to exist in the first place. I collapsed onto a chair, my mind racing. If James wouldn't believe me, I needed proof. I needed to expose Richard's plot before it was too late. I pulled out my phone and called the supermarket where I'd shopped earlier. After explaining I needed to verify my visit for a bank dispute, a helpful manager confirmed they could check their security footage. Yes, I'd been there from 12:15 to 1:05 p.m. Would I like them to send the footage? They could email it within the hour. Next, I called my office. My assistant confirmed I'd returned from lunch at 1:20 p.m. and had been in meetings until 5:30 p.m. She offered to send a record of my badge swipes and meeting minutes. With shaking fingers, I texted James. I have proof. Security footage from the grocery store confirms I was there when these photos were supposedly taken. Please come home so we can figure this out. No response. While waiting, I examined the photos more carefully. There were inconsistencies, a birthmark visible on the woman's shoulder that I didn't have, a watch I'd never owned. The car, while similar to mine, had a dent in the rear bumper that mine didn't. These were details most people wouldn't notice, but a husband should. An hour later, the security footage arrived in my email. There I was, clearly visible pushing a cart through the supermarket at the exact time Richard claimed I was checking into a hotel with a lover. I forwarded it to James with a simple message, the truth. Still no response. By midnight, I was frantic. James hadn't come home, wasn't answering his phone. Had he gone back to his parents? Was Richard filling his head with more lies? At 12:30 a.m., headlights swept across our living room window. I rushed to the door, relief flooding through me as James walked up our path. But the expression on his face wasn't what I expected. Instead of confusion or anger, he looked determined. I talked to Elena, he said without preamble as he walked in. Your parents' housekeeper? Why? Because something about this whole situation felt wrong. He pulled out his phone. She sent me this. He showed me a video, clearly taken surreptitiously, of Richard in his study earlier that day, speaking to the man from the parking lot. They were examining photos together, Richard pointing at something, the man nodding. Elena has never liked how my father treated you, James explained. She's been watching him, suspicious about his behavior. When she overheard him arranging this emergency dinner, she decided to keep an eye on him. So you believe me? My voice broke on the question. I should have believed you from the start. James's face crumpled with regret. But he's my father, Liv. I never thought he'd go this far. What do we do now? James's expression hardened. We confront him. Tonight. It was nearly 1 a.m. when we pulled up to the Barrett estate. The house was mostly dark, except for Richard's study, where lights still burned. The security guard looked surprised to see us, but let us through without question. James didn't bother knocking. He used his key to enter the house and strode directly to his father's study, me close behind. Richard looked up from his desk, momentarily startled before composing his features into a mask of concern. James? Olivia? It's rather late for a visit. Cut the act, Dad. James's voice was cold in a way I'd never heard before. We know what you did. Richard's eyes flicked to me, then back to his son. I'm afraid I don't understand. James placed his phone on the desk, playing Elena's video. Richard watched, his face growing progressively paler as the evidence of his scheme played out before him. You hired someone to pose as my wife in fake photos, James said when the video ended. You tried to destroy my marriage. I was protecting you, Richard insisted, his voice rising. She's never been right for you, James. She's holding you back from your potential, keeping you from your rightful place in this family. The only person trying to control me is you. James's voice shook with barely contained fury. You've never respected my choices, not my career, not my wife, not my life. She'll never fit into our world. Richard exploded, his carefully maintained facade cracking. Look at her. No connections, no breeding, nothing to offer but a pretty face. I built everything I have from nothing, worked my fingers to the bone so you would never have to struggle, and this is how you repay me? By throwing it all away for her. I love her, James said simply. That's something you've never understood. Richard turned to me, his expression venomous. You think you've won, don't you? You've turned my son against me. You did that all by yourself, I replied steadily. I never wanted James to choose between us. You forced that choice. Get out of my house, Richard hissed. Gladly, James said. But first, he pulled out a small recorder from his pocket. I thought you should know this entire conversation has been recorded. If you ever try to interfere in our lives again, this goes public. How do you think your board of directors would react to hearing the great Richard Barrett admit to falsifying evidence and hiring someone to frame his daughter-in-law? Richard's face drained of all color. You wouldn't dare. Try me, James challenged. You taught me to always have leverage, remember? Consider this my first lesson in Barrett business tactics. We left Richard standing in his study, for once speechless. In the car, James reached for my hand. I'm so sorry I doubted you, even for a moment, he said, his voice thick with emotion. You came back, I replied, squeezing his hand. That's what matters. I almost lost you because of him. But you didn't. I leaned over and kissed him gently. We're stronger than his schemes. Dawn was breaking as we arrived home. Exhausted, but somehow lighter, we fell into bed together, holding each other close as the first rays of sunlight filtered through our curtains. What happens now? I asked softly. With your father, I mean. James sighed. I don't know. Part of me wants to cut him off completely. But he's still my father. We don't have to decide everything today, I said. We have time. There is one thing I've decided, James said, propping himself up on one elbow to look at me. I've been offered a partnership at my firm. It would mean more responsibility, more hours initially, but eventually more freedom to choose my projects. That's amazing! Why didn't you tell me? I was going to after dinner. Before everything exploded. He smiled ruefully. I've been holding back, worried about disappointing my father even more. But what happened tonight showed me I've been living in his shadow for too long. So you're taking it? I am. And there's something else. He took a deep breath. I think we should start trying for a baby. If you're ready. Tears sprang to my eyes. We'd talked about children, but always as a future possibility. Something to consider after we were more established, more secure. Are you sure? Your father will see it as another act of rebellion. I don't care what he thinks anymore, James said firmly. I want to build our family on our terms, not his. As the sun rose fully, bathing our bedroom in golden light, I looked at my husband, this man who had chosen me, who had ultimately believed in me despite the elaborate trap set by his own father, and felt a surge of love so powerful it brought fresh tears to my eyes. Yes, I whispered, pulling him close. Let's build something beautiful together. In the weeks that followed, we created clear boundaries with James's parents. Caroline, to her credit, was horrified when she learned what Richard had done. She began visiting us without him, tentatively rebuilding her relationship with both of us, especially after we told her we were trying for a baby. Richard maintained his distance, pride preventing him from offering a genuine apology. But the overt hostility ceased, replaced by a cold civility whenever our paths crossed. It wasn't perfect, but it was livable. As for us, the ordeal had changed something fundamental in our relationship. The doubt that had momentarily crept in had been replaced by a deeper trust, a knowledge that we had faced the worst someone could throw at us and emerged stronger. 6 weeks after what we now called the frame-up, I missed my period. The pregnancy test confirmed what I already suspected. We were going to be parents. When I told James, he lifted me off my feet, spinning me around our kitchen with tears in his eyes. My father will be furious, he said, but his smile never faltered. Let him be, I replied, kissing him. This baby will have everything it needs, 2 parents who love each other fiercely and who will never let anyone come between them again. And in that moment, standing in our modest kitchen in our imperfect house with our imperfect life stretching before us, I knew we had won something far more valuable than Richard Barrett's approval. We had won our freedom to love each other, to build our family, to define success on our own terms. Some battles are worth fighting, even when they seem impossible to win. Some love is worth protecting, even when the world tries to tear it apart. And sometimes, the greatest victory isn't defeating your enemy, but refusing to let them change who you are and what you believe in. That night, as James slept beside me, his hand resting protectively over my still flat stomach, I silently thanked Richard Barrett for his cruel scheme. Without knowing it, he had given us a gift, the certainty that what we had built together could withstand anything, even the manipulations of the man who had once seemed all-powerful in our lives. Our story wasn't over. In many ways, it was just beginning. But the hardest chapter had been written, and we had emerged from it not as victims, but as victors. Together.